What if I told you that scientists took a creature out of the frozen ground, a creature that had been locked in ice since before the pyramids, before agriculture, before written language, before Neanderthals went extinct, thawed it in a laboratory dish, and watched it wake up? Not a clone built from salvaged DNA, the actual original animal, alive, moving, and within weeks reproducing. This is not science fiction. This happened. The findings were published in 2023, and the implications are so staggering that scientists are still trying to fully process what it means. Today, we are telling the story of the most resilient creature ever discovered, a microscopic worm that survived 46,000 years frozen beneath the Siberian permafrost, and what its impossible resurrection tells us about the nature of life itself. Buckle up. This one will change how you think about what it means to be alive. Let me know in the comments if you are familiar with this story, or with the story of any other creature with a similar survival tale. Subscribe and keep watching, because this gets wilder as we progress. In fact, the revived female worm in this story, without any male partner, reproduced by itself. Stick around until the end so you do not miss any part of this incredible story. Our story begins in the remote wilderness of northeastern Siberia, along the banks of the Kolyma River, one of the coldest, most desolate regions on the planet. This area sits atop some of the world's deepest and oldest permafrost, frozen ground that in some places has not thawed since the last ice age. For decades, scientists have been drilling into this frozen earth, pulling up cores of ancient sediment like pages from a geological history book. In 2002, a team from the Russian Academy of Sciences was doing exactly that, extracting deep permafrost samples when they found something extraordinary buried roughly 40 meters below the surface, inside the fossilized burrow of an ancient Arctic ground squirrel. Microscopic worms, nematodes, frozen solid. The samples were stored, and it wasn't until 2018 that scientist Anastasia Shatilovich thawed them in the lab and made the discovery that would eventually shake the scientific world. Now, nematodes are not glamorous creatures. They are among the most abundant animals on Earth. Tiny, transparent, worm-like organisms around a millimeter long, barely visible to the naked eye. There are more nematodes in a handful of soil than there are humans on the planet. Scientists have studied them for over a century. But these nematodes were different. When the team carefully thawed their samples and placed the contents into a petri dish in the lab, these worms moved. After 46,000 years of frozen silence, a creature from the Pleistocene era uncurled, stretched, and began to crawl. Let's pause here because I think we owe it to this story to truly feel how long 46,000 years actually is. When this worm was alive and crawling through the tundra soil, woolly mammoths were still thundering across the Eurasian steppe. Woolly rhinoceroses were grazing on frozen grasslands. Cave lions, among the largest feline predators to ever walk the earth, were stalking prey across what is now Siberia. Modern humans had only recently arrived in Europe. Neanderthals were still alive and may have overlapped with our species in some parts of the world. There were no cities, no farms, no writing, no wheels. The oldest cave paintings in the world were just being made. The entire history of human civilization, every empire, every war, every invention, every work of art, fits inside the time this worm spent frozen. The worm was not just any nematode. When scientists sequenced its genome, they discovered it was an entirely new species. one never before described by science. They named it Panagrolimus colimensis, after the Colima River region where it was found. Radiocarbon dating of the surrounding permafrost and plant material confirmed the staggering age, between 45,839 and 47,769 years old. These are not round numbers pulled from thin air. They are the result of rigorous scientific dating techniques applied to the sediment layers encasing the worm's frozen home. And here is where the story takes another extraordinary turn. The revived worm was female. And without a mate, without any partner at all, she began to reproduce. Nematodes of this type reproduce asexually, a single female generating offspring entirely on her own. Within weeks of revival, the scientists had a living, multiplying colony of animals, descended from a creature that had last been alive during the Ice Age. The research team ultimately cultivated the revived nematode for over 100 generations in the lab. This was not just a brief flicker of life, it was a full, sustained biological comeback. The findings were published in the prestigious journal PLOS Genetics in 2023, sending shockwaves through the scientific community. So how? How is this even possible? The answer lies in one of the most extraordinary biological phenomena ever discovered, a state called cryptobiosis. Cryptobiosis, from the Greek for hidden life, pauses all measurable biological activity in response to extreme environmental stress. No metabolism, growth, or reproduction. No detectable signs of life whatsoever. It is not dormancy or hibernation. It is not even a coma. It is something closer to suspended existence. The animal is not alive in any conventional sense, but it is not dead either. It exists in a biological limbo, waiting. Nematodes are known to be remarkably tough, but Panagrolimus colimensis appears to have taken this to an unprecedented extreme. When scientists compared its genome to modern nematode relatives, particularly the well-studied lab species Caenorhabditis elegans, they found that the ancient worm used a similar genetic toolkit to enter and survive cryptobiosis. Specifically, it produces a sugar called trehalose, a molecule that essentially replaces the water inside cells during freezing, forming a protective glassy matrix around cellular structures that prevents ice crystals from tearing them apart. Think of it like this. Normally, when cells freeze, ice crystals form inside them and shred the delicate membranes and proteins that keep a cell functional. Trehalose steps in and turns the cell interior into something more like glass than ice, rigid but intact. No tearing, no rupture, perfect preservation. The worm did not just survive by accident. It had evolved a sophisticated biological toolkit, honed over millions of years of evolution, designed specifically to cheat death. There is, however, a shadow over all of this. The permafrost that preserved Panagrolimus colimensis for 46,000 years is melting rapidly. Across Siberia, Alaska, and northern Canada, rising temperatures are thawing ground that has been frozen since the Pleistocene, and this is not a slow, distant process. It is happening now, measurably, every single year. As the permafrost thaws, the organisms within it are exposed to air, bacteria, and warmth for the first time in tens of thousands of years. Most will simply decompose, releasing stored carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere, and driving further warming in a feedback loop that climate scientists describe as one of the most dangerous and unpredictable elements of the climate crisis. The same melting that gave us Panagrolimus colimiensis is also destroying thousands of specimens before scientists ever get the chance to find them. And there's another concern, one that sounds dramatic, but which serious scientists do not dismiss: ancient pathogens. Research published in early 2023 reported that scientists revived ancient viruses, including one named Pandoravirus yedoma, from Siberian permafrost samples nearly 50,000 years old. These viruses were capable of infecting amoeba cells under laboratory conditions. The viruses studied were giant viruses that target single-celled organisms, not human cells, and they pose no known direct threat to human health. But the research raises a broader question that scientists are actively monitoring: whether thawing permafrost could eventually expose pathogens that modern immune systems have never encountered. The vast majority of thawing ancient microbes pose no meaningful threat to human health. But the possibility, however slim, that permafrost could release dangerous pathogens is a risk that researchers take seriously. The ice is not just a time capsule. It is a vault we are opening carefully, and not always by choice. Panagrolimus colimiensis is evidence that life, when pushed to its absolute limits, finds ways we have not imagined yet. Evidence that the boundary between living and not living is stranger and more permeable than we ever suspected. Evidence that the Earth has been keeping secrets in its ice, and it is only now beginning to tell them. We are listening. If this story left your jaw on the floor, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love stories like this. Subscribe, because we cover the most extraordinary discoveries in the history of life on Earth every single week. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think cryptobiosis could ever work in humans? And would you want it to? I'll see you in the next one.